And on the back, I'll hold it up here if anybody didn't get it, for Craig Kimbrough's contact information. But I know most of you, or I've met you at other classes before, but I'm Cynthia Allen. I'm with MTSU Stormwater Program. And what that is a joint partnership with the city of Murfreesboro to protect our streams, our local streams. And we do annual projects every year throughout the city, trying to figure out what is the most helpful. So some of it's restoration projects, removing invasive species, like that partnership with the battlefield. And we're also, Gibb and I are on the, and Dr. Anderson, many of you guys know Dr. Anderson, we're all members of the Storms River Watershed Association, so that's why I put some information back there, because we're always looking for people, and we could always use master gardeners. So we love that group. So if anybody's interested in that, I am not an expert gardener by any means, or pond maker, or stream bed, but we learn a lot from the experts, and it's always changing. Some of the issues that we're dealing with change. So that's why it's really good. I always feel like to just everybody talk about what they're seeing out there. I had this in the wrong order, so I apologize. So some of the class goals for this today is to talk about water ponds and water features, how they might could affect outside of the community, and why it's important for the choices of the plants that you do. So I really want to have a lot of feedback, especially if some people have some ponds, because I feel like we learn a lot from each other, and just sharing some of that knowledge I think is good for us as a community. We'll talk about some planning and researching different water features and the plants and how they affect our larger community. What are exotic invasives, which I'm preaching to the choir if everybody's master gardeners. So, and then some common do's and don'ts. And I'm terrible with technology, so I apologize. Let's see. Okay. So I'm curious to why each of you are kind of attending already, just to see who has ponds already. Does everybody have big ponds or little ponds?
I've got a huge pond.
You've got a huge pond. You've got a huge pond.
I got a big farm pond.
So farm ponds. Is yours
Smaller pond.
a what?
Smaller pond.
It's a smaller, like a backyard feature. And do you have a pond?
No, but
Not
just
yet.
a little water somewhere.
And you've got a pond too?
Yes,
What's yours?
3,000 gallon.
So you're, let's see. Also, do you guys have some issues that you're dealing with already?
The stuff,
The algae,
yeah, that clumps together.
different kinds of algae, so limitations. Craig Kimbrough, so I'll hold the contact information. If you didn't get Craig's contact information, he has been a great resource, and he does come up, especially for farm ponds, and he's got classes on farm pond management. So you definitely want to get this before you go if you do have some of the big ponds. Have you ever met Craig?
No.
He's come up a couple times, and he's been helping us with the city of Murfreesboro for Todd Lake, because we're having some issues with Todd Lake for Invasive Plants and Discovery Center. And we're seeing these spread throughout the community and some of our other streams, and so that's kind of why this is a new class for us. And we're trying to get some feedback for what's going on in the community, and maybe just spread the word about how some of these invasives are spreading throughout. And does anybody have any tips that's worked for them, or anything they would want to share
Algae.
for any pond topics?
Well, UV's your best bet, as far as I'm concerned, helping your green algae.
Have you had a lot of luck with that? I know a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
it's the depth. So how deep are some of your ponds?
Mine's 3 feet.
Yours is 3 feet.
Yeah.
Is yours
I
very
don't
deep?
know, I've never been down in
Mine's
the
just a
middle
little
of
over,
it.
mine's just a little over 2.
What about yours?
2.
2 feet. That shallowness is our biggest issue. Yeah, it's a tough one because the sunlight can reach through. Todd Lake, that's one of the reasons why we're seeing some of the issues there, is because it's a shallow
UV filter will get rid of your greens algae, rainwater, pea algae. And, the other one, I use Algae Fix.
What's a distributor you use?
I usually go through, Pet Mountain. There's Pet Mountain, there's Webb's, there's Dr. Foster and Smith. Check the prices.
Yeah, I took a couple, I had found the pond guy, just because I thought he had some really good resources for, identifying some of the plants and algae too.
Yeah.
But there are a ton, we'll put this up on the screen later, there's so many resources out there that you can get bogged down. This, like I said, this is a new class for me, so I think I was out till late in the night, still modifying it with some of the research and stuff that I was going through, because I love this topic, and so you can spend, a while, kind of on it. But is anybody curious, I'm curious about what you're hoping to learn from this class too, especially since it's a new class that we've done. How to design them, how to prevent algae,
And care for 'em.
how to care for them.
Maybe some different types of plants that are good to use.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I kind of want to talk about, and I brought some resources and put them back here. One is an NLCS publication. They've got just some general information on backyard ponds. Most of these are going to be your smaller ponds. It's not a lot of information, but this booklet in general, I think, is kind of just a nice one to go over some just home tips in general, and then I have a section on ponds. Probably many of you guys are already with the Tennessee Exotic Pest Plant Council, right? Or you guys already, nobody? They have some fantastic resources that they've built, so this is back there too. And we'll go through what this is in detail on this, but we have a lot of invasive issues going on in the state and in our region, and so we refer to this quite a bit, or this group. And they've been the one that's had some of the best publications for specific plant choices. So we can give this out to you guys today too. And then I've just put some various ones in the back for our rain gardens and some of our stream information. But at Old Fort Park too, if you're interested in just other kinds of water features, we have some water quality demonstration areas at Old Fort Park when you kind of meander through, and I think they still have some of the brochures there, but this kind of talks about some of those too. So if you're interested in other things for just different kinds of water features on your property, this might be kind of interesting, too, to see and talk about. And some of these will help you maybe address some water issues even on your property. If you've got a lot of runoff or something like that. So we kind of just threw several little things together. And then, like I said, I'm a member of the Stone River Watershed Association, so that's got some information back there.
With plants on dry land, it's very easy to find the information about how they differ by zone. With plants in the water, I haven't been able to find that kind of information. Like, do water plants vary if I'm putting them in a pond in Massachusetts versus Tennessee? Are there water plants that like living in Tennessee better than the same kind of information about what would make a water plant here in Tennessee versus that information I find much harder for water plants than for land plants.
And the tricky part, we're going to go over some of this through here too, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the tricky part is some of the best plants that do extremely well in our water gardens are some of our worst plants for our community, because they're so well adapted to our climate. They have no competition. They just take over. So an example is like our privet and our kudzu. We have equal forms of those in the aquatic stages of plants that we're having a lot of problems. I heard you mention parrot feather. Parrot feather is blooming crazily. I know, but it is so one of our most invasive ones.
Of course, mine's enclosed, but I took out too much, really. I had to.
And some of them, we'll talk about, some of these, the way their life cycles are, they, just when you break them apart, they reproduce. So they don't necessarily have to have seed or rhizome. They can just reproduce from segments and fragments. And so part of this is not to say that any plant is bad or good. It's about being more aware of the plant choices and where we're using them, because part what you're wanting to do. So like some of our ponds you said are shallow, some are large. Some of our water quality features may not have any plants at all. So depending on what you're wanting to put in your yard is gonna depend a lot too on your plant choices. I don't know if anybody's a Pinterest fan. I'm addicted to Pinterest. I can watch those ideas all day long. So your planting stages, I feel like, is a lot to define what kind of plants we're going to use, and what size and scale. Do you want it formal? Do you want it real casual? Are you trying to solve some maybe water issues or some runoff? So your planting stage, I feel like, is a really important part. And you can go small or large. Some of the containers. So it kind of depends if you're wanting a pond or a water feature as well. So I just kind of put some unique ideas if you don't already have one, and you just want some water features. They can go so easy. I thought this was a different kind of a take.
That's great.
Yeah, and some of these are really easy and they're more formal, and some of these, see, they don't even have plants, so it kind of depends on what you're wanting to do. Here's some medium ones. This one was kind of fun.
I like that.
I saw a whale tail. I mean, if you have a big pond, they had, it's just, you can spend hours. I could spend hours on this. Some of them are, people are doing these channels through their property, or just waterfalls. Some are really simple and kind of just more formal. This was the before and after version. And part of this, when I was going through it, is to point out some of them, the plants aren't actually in the water, but there's some of your grasses just beside your bank. And also, it was hard developing this because it was a new class and not really doing it before. What people are already doing and what they're looking for. Are they just trying to add some interest to their backyard and maybe add some property? Or is it pond management for livestock? And that had a big, that mattered greatly on what we were going to create and talk about for plants. So this is, like I said, a new class. So I'm kind of just tossing out some ideas to get some general feel of what people are kind of doing. I love this one on the corner, just a simple. And these are all different depths. This one I thought was kind of pretty, like if you just had like a gutter you're trying to divert and maybe go to a rain garden at the end or something, or just circulate it. Some they do the lighting features instead of the plants and just have them in the containers. Then you get to the larger ones. Some of these are the dry stream beds and the wet stream beds going through the properties. And they're capturing and circulating them, so depending on how you want to hook it up to maybe your gutters, or this one I was like, it's just mostly boulders. That's what made me think when you said come over and build. I kept thinking of all the rocks I had seen in these pictures and how much I had to dig.
I know mine are right on top of the ground, you know.
These dry stream beds have been a big topic. I don't know if you guys have seen these, but just to divert like runoff. These are cool. I like those. Take a look at those.
And that's what I need.
We're doing a lot of the boulders over on campus too from our rain gardens, but some of them I noticed, and we'll cover this in some other ones. Some of them you have to really watch what you're seeing on the internet too, because some of them, if you go by the recommendations, I noticed a lot of these are closer to the foundation than you might want to put them, depending on how much runoff. Some are diverting them away, but it kind of goes in a way to our rain garden classes and how to decide your soil too, where you want to put it so it doesn't cause foundation problems. And then we kind of go into just our rain gardens and what's the difference of some of the water features in the ponds. So kind of my interest was if people already had existing ponds or just were looking for water features for their property or not. But there were just a lot of choices. And then the plant selections, as we've looked throughout these, have been so diverse too. So it really kind of depends on what you're wanting to put it and what you're dealing with. So, that's what led me to our plants and our invasives versus natives and exotic species that we're having issues with, and why I referred a lot to this throughout this presentation. So, as master gardeners, we kind of looking more for horticultural and specialty, I feel like in some ways. Do they cover a lot of natives and that in it? And so I figured most of you guys might already know a little bit about this, but I didn't know if you had the publications. But so I didn't know who would all be in here and how many people weren't master gardeners, but I kind of went back to the history and what we consider exotics and non-natives, because even not being a master gardener, I realized some of our non-natives have been here so long. People might think they're natives. So what constitutes an exotic versus an invasive and a native plant? And it turns, I was surprised to know that like 85% of what we have brought in, they figured back from the historian, just the trends of how the plants were coming in, about 85% were just brought in as non-native exotics. And of that, only about 1% are the really crazy invasives that really cause, and that surprised me that it was such a low number, 1%, because if you've been out there with us, it's a lot of land that these little 1%s are taking over, and it's a real battle to try and take that land back and let our natives help to get restored. So I'm thankful that it's only 1%, because I don't know how we would manage if that percent was a lot higher, because that's a lot of work once these do make their way into the community. And so our native plants, and going back, and the other thing that I realize is it is hard to find some of the distributors and a good source of some of these native plants. And like you said, for the aquatics, it's harder as well. But I kind of wanted to talk about the invasives and why, for us, what we see a lot here is the rapid growth and how it just disperses and takes over our native plants. And we're seeing that along the stream banks quite a bit, and how wildlife is transporting these. And so we're seeing like parrot feather in areas that we would never have normally seen parrot feather, or some of our others. But parrot feather seems to be more aggressive lately than some of the other ones. But this is also surprising. So U.S. Forest Service and our National Public Wildlife, our national parks, they're all working on this for their trails, and $138 billion is what they estimate. And this was, I tried to find a current number, because I know when we talk about litter at the college, one thing that resonates with the students is how much money that costs, and the effort and the personnel that it takes to do this. And we're really seeing how it is going in and destroying some of our recreation ponds and getting out. And so that was more of the approach that I wanted to take today. Is it's hard to say which plants are the best to use, because not all of them are bad. Some of our invasives are better choices, because it's the only choice that we can find sometimes. So it's almost just really being more aware when you're making your choices, and seeing that you make the best choice that's available to you, and trying to minimize a chance for spread if you do have it in your landscape. And then this is how they're ranked. So that's kind of where this document is coming from. And they rank severe. That's basically where it's so invasive, it's coming in and it's overtaking quickly. So kudzu is an example, parrot feather is an example, the milfoil is an example, hydrilla. Some of those are the ones that are coming in, and they're displacing the native species so fast that you just end up with a monoculture in the area. And that changes sometimes your wildlife that will live and depend in that too. So if you're having trouble maybe stocking your ponds and stuff like that, it all kind of comes together as an ecosystem. So that's kind of how the invasives work into the bigger scheme of things too. So our number one severe threat species, they're listed in here in a lot of detail, just for plant choices in general. I couldn't find a really good selection of aquatic plants, but I do have some links here of some like Pond Guy and some other aquatic specialty stores that don't rank them, but they kind of talk about them in more detail. So when you're going out and you're deciding where you're buying your plants, you can almost research them a little bit to see how it fits into your need better. So 2 is a significant threat. There's invasive and they're still taking over, but it's at a slower speed. They compete pretty aggressively with our native species. So I would say if it's on the 1 or 2 list on our Tennessee species, because the other hard part is with the internet and online, we're ordering these from all over. So like you said, Massachusetts versus Tennessee, what are we seeing in other states? And that's where this Watchlist is, it's a lesser threat, but they noticed that in some of the other states, it may be ranked 1 or 2, and it just hasn't come to Tennessee yet and been that aggressive. But they wanted us to kind of watch and see if we see them and if they're aggressive in our waterways or if we're having some problems with them. And then that Tennessee noxious weed list, this is what Tennessee has said, this is causing drastic problems in our state already. It's either clogging our recreation areas or it's been a problem for public health or some other issues, and so they don't want that here at all. It's been banned. But I don't really know how well, if it's been banned and it's coming in other sources, you may not be buying it, but it still be making its way. So this was kind of an interesting topic to talk about because there's no easy answers to really finding some of these solutions. So that's where it talked about, and that was back in 99 where they said that about 85% had come in and that 1% are these just truly detrimental plants that are causing a lot of cost and problems. So when we're talking about some of the plants that you might see in order, part of the problem is that these are very readily available, and some of these might be the only species that some of the aquatic sources are selling or making available, or that you can go to the aquatic aquarium stores and buy, quickly and easily. So part of this is just more of awareness and seeing where we're putting them and trying to keep them more managed, I guess. But hydrilla, that's what this picture is right up here, and that's the one that can reproduce from fragments as you break it apart. It looks kind of similar, not exactly, to some of the other plants that you might see. They call this the kudzu of the water, although I think here we see parrot feather more. We do see hydrilla, but the parrot feather for some reason seems to be taking hold a lot more. This is the aquatic water moss, giant salvinia. Even though it's a littler plant, it makes these big mats. So some of the other states that are having problems, some of those are regionally around us, so that's kind of why I think this is making its way into our area quite a bit. So if you're seeing these, maybe use these in less or try to manage them as much as you can, or if you've got waterfowl or boats that could be transporting them, maybe clean the equipment to just try and do what we can to reduce it. For 2, these are some of those. Here's the parrot feather, which I was actually surprised to find it on 2 because it's made its way so much more through the communities and it's been so much more of a problem. But I think that's where it depends regionally on where you are too. And some of these are tied into what TDA sees with some of its lakes and dams and what people are seeing in some of their ponds. So that's why I think this data it's consistent, they try and update it, but sometimes what we see locally may not be what's listed. So these are kind of just to go by. This is the milfoil. this one has been around a long time and they've had a lot of problems. Since the 40s, they've been trying to do this, so it makes me think that we're probably never gonna address these issues in our lifetime. We're just, trying to manage them as best we can. Then here's the curly pond weed, and then the watercress. And some of these too, I put up the scientific name because there may be some other varieties, and that's kind of what I did later in here is kind of go by if we have wet soils, if you're not just putting them strictly in a pond, what you might could use on the bank as some choices. But these are really just go-bys, because it's really hard to say this is gonna work in every situation. This Elodia, we see this quite a bit actually too. Todd Lake has several of these species in it. I think we have also, I think there's one called Alligator Tail that I can see pop up on a list. But we're actually seeing this Elodia in some of our areas.
You have trouble with horse tail?
I can't remember. We walked through, so Craig Kimbrough came down with us to walk through Discovery Center. And Discovery Center is probably our most aggressive area. If you guys have been there and walked, you can see those mats of parafeather. And the city's putting considerable money to try and maintain that. And part of these, as you know with your ponds, there's a cycle and the timing to doing this. Sometimes our winters will make some of these plants die back. Some are aggressive and they're making it even through some of our harsh winters and our freezes. We've got some lilies over on campus. They seem to be, some seasons they're quite large and some seasons they die back quite a bit. But Craig Kimbrough came down and kind of walked through to see for Todd Lake and the Discovery Center to see what we were kind of doing and what some of the vendors that we were using and what some of the management ideas were. And he is a really good resource for what they're seeing and what they're using for other pond management in our area. So if you've got a stream on your property and you're seeing any of these issues, or like I said, your ponds in general, he's just really good about knowing what works for maintaining certain kinds of species. And he does this and works with the management side of it quite a bit. So I feel like he's a really good expert that knows in our area versus maybe the wholesalers that are selling us, because he may know where to get some other, or what you can maybe plant that can compete enough to maybe hold it. Because sometimes I feel like if we can get enough natives in there to combat it, maybe we have a fighting chance. But we're having a hard time finding some of the natives that are going to compete well. And then this is our watch list where they're having some issues in our region, but we're not really seeing the issues here. Water hyacinth, this water primrose, we're seeing some of this, I believe, over at Todd Lake too. The water nymph and this water chestnut. And part of the reason these are important too, and one of the things that he brought up is you can clog and raise the organic matter in your ponds, and it can change your ponds considerably. So there's a whole ecosystem to all these plant choices. And some of the things we might not think about, and for the city where they've kind of been watching them too, is in drainage and flooding and how fast that's impacting the levels of the organic matter that settles out for those holding ponds. And so there's just an art to this. And that's why I feel like the best thing that I can tell you is to really get to know some experts if you're using some of these and talk and see what's in your pond maybe already, what might work, because I don't think there's a cookie cutter approach to this. It's more just awareness and using some of the tools and resources that have worked for other people too. So some of the native solutions, like she said too, we don't have a good truly aquatic plant list. But some of these can do for wet soils, and some of them can be used depending on how you're doing your water feature. But purple loosestrife is one that I think sometimes gets used, but that's an invasive. So there's some examples of some things to use. And also, one of the great things about our plantings is these help our pollinators. So some of these choices that we make for some of our invasives also help us with our pollinators and protecting some of our other species. So it's just remembering how the whole idea is connected. Spider lily, I had never seen that plant before. Does anybody have spider lily? And then I heard it in one of these YouTube videos. So I was just curious if anybody had that. The southern blue flag of Virginia iris, that's great in a rain garden and some wet soils. I was surprised at that too, but it could take some wetter. It's just a versatile plant. The blazing stars. Anyway, that was just some ideas. And the colors, I tried to pick some plants that had some colors too for variety, but some of the grasses, they break this up into trees and shrubs and grasses and vines. So this isn't a comprehensive list, but it's at least something to kind of go by. Their website is great. There's some links that I'll put up here later too that's got some other websites as well. What about this wild ginger? Has anybody used that?
I don't know.
You kind of see it different times, but not, I haven't seen it used as heavily like that, so I was surprised. Some of these I hadn't seen, but the blue stem, I've heard Larry Sizemore talk about that a lot. Some of this Larry has, worked in university forever, and now through osmosis, some of this knowledge has come in handy from what I've heard him talk about for years. So the best sources that I could tell or to recommend that I could think about is trying to take it back to our Tennessee links and resources as much as we can. The USDA and NRCS, that's Craig Kimbrough's email address, and then this has his phone number. But they have a website, and I tried to hyperlink some of these. I don't know if they'll work, but let's see. This mouse. There's just a lot of information that these link to, and they all have the images of the plants. Tenepsi, I wanted to point out, I just learned this, they're going to change their name, so I don't know how that's going to affect their website, but I think it'll probably hyperlink and roll you around. They're going to be the Invasive Plant Council now instead. I don't know if that's going to open, so I'll just escape that. Well, there it goes. And so then they have a lot of different detail. And I noticed on some of these, they do have some more pond, and you can, depending on how you search, some of these websites are really good about how they do their searches. So you can get really specific too. If you're looking for a specific plant or not, you can pull up for just our state. And I don't think this is the one that had the ponds. One of them had ponds that pulled up quite a bit. But USDA and NRCS was actually pretty good for doing some research on. Tenepsi, their website is updated, I think, quite a bit. So theirs is a good one to go to. Tennessee Native Plant Society, I felt like they would probably be a better source. And then this man down here, I didn't have his name until just last night, but he works with TVA, and he's an aquatic specialist too. So if you're already seeing some of these and you're having some issues, his only job, it looked like, was aquatic plants, and he's not far from our area either. The Tennessee Native Plant Society, I want to say they did have some pond links, if I remember. Is anybody a member of this group? Or know some people from them? I felt like I didn't know many people from there either, and that's a group I want to try and get to know more. They have a newsletter you can sign up for, and I don't know if they had the fonts though. This YouTube video, I don't know if you guys wanna watch it or not. This is Josh. Do we have time? Is anybody in a hurry? This is Josh, and the pond guy. I thought that was one of the better sources, and they do online, but they really talk about some of the invasives and the issues that they're doing. They have a book, The Water Weeds and Algae, that's supposedly considered by the experts as one of the better books out there. And it's been used for several years, so if you do have some of these farm ponds, that might be a good resource for you guys. And it's like $9, it's a cheap one. That was one that we were gonna get. So Josh Upham works at the city of Murfreesboro with me, with all of us, and he helps with the program. And he actually sees a lot of these streams and goes out and does our assessments. And he's been noticing how we've never had some of these invasives in some of our streams and how they're just showing up. And that's why I put this in. This plays on the local channel as one of our public service announcements.
You know, one of the things that the Stormwater program does is we're tasked with making sure that our water quality is good, that all of our streams are not impaired, and we try to, make sure that stormwater runoff in this city is clean when it enters the stream. We do a visual stream assessments that it kind of helps us get an idea of what's going on in the streams beyond our sampling and our monitoring. It gives us the opportunity to walk every mile of the stream in the city and take note with the GPS unit of different problems that we see. And that could be erosion sites, trash dumping sites, but also gives us the opportunity recently to do biological assessments. And that's where we started seeing the invasive aquatic plant species. The parrot feather is a good example of a invasive aquatic plant species that we see in our waters. It used to be confined just to the Discovery Center, the wetlands at the Discovery Center, but recently on our assessments we've seen it in multiple streams in the city, the West Fork Stones River, the Middle Fork Stones River, and we're starting to see it a little bit in Lytle Creek. So this is definitely a problem that we want to address. They're bad because they crowd out native vegetation that's detrimental to ecosystem and detrimental to stream quality. Parrot feather is very aggressive. They'll form a mat, and that mat is very thick, and that mat can impede stream flow. For example, here in the wetlands, at one time this area was highly inundated with parrot feather. It's currently getting treated, but it was so bad that you could observe the ducks couldn't swim freely through the wetlands. They had to actually get out and walk across the matting. And so in certain situations, you'll see this form of invasive plant really take over a stream channel. It's estimated by the Tennessee Exotic Pest and Plant Council that $2.6 million has been spent statewide to help with these efforts. So it definitely is a costly impact that these plants are having on our waterways. These invasive plant species, they're introduced to the local waters in many different ways. But one of the thoughts is that it could be coming in from aquatic gardens that are popular, koi ponds, this plant especially, but the parrot feather is a popular aquarium plant. And so it may be that it's entering the water by either dumping directly your fish tank into the stream, but a more indirect way is if, say, you dump the parrot feather in your backyard and you're close to a stormwater conveyance and a storm event comes, and the fragments wash into the conveyance and eventually make it to the stream. We've begun treatment several years ago, and it appears to be working quite well. So it's not to say that it's not going to come back, but we need to be really aware of what we're putting in the way of our water bodies, and make sure that these invasive plant species don't end up back in our waters.
season, it's, very difficult.
Okay, our pond is not a land pond, it's man-made pond. Now, if we get this parrot feather plant and put it in there, will that shade the pond? Because I'm getting so much algae from the sun, I need something to shade.
Well,
shade that.
one of the alternatives, and I don't know how well this works, that's kind of why I wanted some feedback, but one of the alternatives is aeration or dyes that you can use. So
Use the dyes before.
The dyes.
and they're much more, they're much more cost efficient in the long run. You might spend a little bit more on the front end, but on the back end, if your parrot feather takes over, it can change the whole ecosystem of your pond and end up costing you more in the long run trying to do the maintenance to keep that down, if that makes sense. So part of it is really, that's why I say it's hard for me to say there's a one size fits all. But Craig Kimbrough, that's what he does, is this pond management. And he's there to kind of give you ideas to try so that you don't do just one, like here's some options. He might, it might be, or you might can just send him pictures, like, Mitchell Moe can ID some stuff pretty good. But he works with people regularly on this pond management, and he can kind of tell you what's good or not. Parrot feather, the other thing about that is sometimes there's mechanical where you have to go in and scoop it and clean it out. But like Discovery Center's had it so long, and the organic material is so thick on the bottom, it's changed it so much you can't walk in the bottom of that stream. It is quicksand. I mean, it is, and some of your ponds, I don't know if they're maybe like that or not, but, so you have to float it, and part of the problem is too, when you're raking these in, a lot of these, proliferate through the fragmentation in the segments. So you can actually, make the problem worse by going in with these mechanical measures. So it's almost like you really wanna look before you decide and see what works for you or what doesn't. There might be some other options besides the parrot feather, because you don't want it completely matted out, or you're gonna change the ecosystem for the fish and the other animals that are gonna be in there too. And that's where some of this waterfowl might be transporting, and probably likely is transporting a lot of these too from place to place. But my personal recommendations are to probably assess what's there, what's the status of it, what's your pH levels, what's your organic matter already, how deep is it. Kind of do an assessment of your pond, what are some of your species that are living in there. And then see what could be maybe introduced natively to combat it, and establish those first, and then kind of see. But I don't know that 100% will work, and a lot of it's going to depend on if you can find some of these native species in some of the wholesale stores. But I can tell you that if you do have a problem with it, it can be very costly to try and manage, and so that's kind of one of the reasons why we do that. And if you back off of it, like I think Discovery, I think some of that parrot feather came back pretty aggressive again, and so the city's on it. Chemical has been working the most on the parrot feather, but it's a maintenance plan that you can't get off of, and it's seasonally, you have to apply it at the right time.
Now, does that harm the wildlife and the other things that are in there?
No, I can't remember what the product is that they use, but it's safe for the aquatic wildlife. That's the hard thing too, because we work on the microscopic and the macro bugs, and so it's hard to say that what's always safe, but we know that we have to protect those, so they try and choose the safest chemical for that. But if you have an aggressive outgrowth, you don't have that, you don't have the ecosystem and those bugs. So it's kind of a catch-22. It's unique to manage, and that's kind of why we wanted to do this class and offer this, is to really get people talking and seeing what the scope of what's working for some people, where they're getting some of their sources, maybe have a push for getting more of these native species that we know. Like Florida and some of theirs, I don't know where I read this, but they had an issue with, their alligators. And they were basically like like you can roll an alligator over and they were kind of going comatose, like they kind of go to sleep. Well, they couldn't figure out what was wrong with their alligators. And through a lot of trial and error, they thought it was poisoned with something, or some chemical or pesticide or something that had gotten into the waterways. But after a lot of research, they finally determined that some of the native fish species were dying off, and the only ones that were left were the carp. And carp, I can't remember which B vitamin, I want to say it might be thiamine, but carp don't metabolize that as readily, or whatever the B vitamin was. So when the alligators were forced to have that be their only food supply, they weren't getting this B vitamin, if I'm remembering the story right. And so it was basically a deficiency from their food supply. The food chain had been drastically altered, and it affected this top, predator. So that's, was an example of how these ecosystems can be changed pretty quickly. And some of these plant selections can affect some of the other natives for their food supply and their food source. And so it's just to kind of remember that we're dealing with whole ecosystems, and your backyard is an ecosystem, and then the stream next to you, it kind of, grows into our, the whole community wide, and even our region, and that's why we're seeing some of these spread. So it's more of just an awareness that we're trying to raise, and get some feedback and some communications going. One thing I noticed too is if you're doing just your searches for pond plants, you're going to get a lot of data that you're going to think is correct. And some of them, like I love P. Allen Smith. I think he's one of our best gardeners. I love to watch him. But I noticed his video that he did on the YouTube on, I guess I must not hyperlinked it. He's telling everybody some of these invasive plants to use, and they may not have realized, or it may not be an issue in some of their areas. So part of it is understanding who deciding for yourself who some of the experts are, and just being knowledgeable enough to decide for yourself some of the choices that you might want to make. And I did some more specific searches on non-invasive aquatic plants, and I've had some better results coming up with that, and that's what some of these links are. And I'll be glad to email this to anybody or to make it available if we want, because that one link was so big. It was a PDF, and it was pretty big. There's another PDF too. But if you use more specific words when you're searching of what you want, like Tennessee native aquatic plants or something like that, that will, I think, help in some of the research that you're getting. This was like a good site. It was actually from the UK, but it had some of our Tennessee natives on it, but it actually was talking about native species. So part of it is what to do. I try to summarize it really quickly. And your planning and your research phase, I feel like just like anything else, that's going to be your most important phase. And there's so many local resources here. There's so many resources in general that you can just get inundated with it. And that's kind of why we wanted to bring a general awareness, so that when you're doing your research, things may stand out or not stand out, and what you might want to decide for yourself is a more effective plan. But the Extension Center, UT Extension in general, and then our Extension Center here are a great place to start. Master Gardeners, I feel like you guys are always a great place to start, because everybody shares the plants, and so there may be some plants that somebody else has gotten, or that they may have luck with. The pond guy, I don't know why, I just seem to like his site. He does a blog that sends out some information. They've got good tips. You can contact them directly. They're not in our area, but they're regional. some folks like that might have more luck of getting some of the plants if you're having a hard time and you request them specifically. Just the library and books, there's some of those books you can buy. The Pond Guy had that one book that's just been basically the textbook to go to that a lot of like water resource managers use. And like I said, it's only like $10, but it had a lot on the algae, filamentaceous, just algae and some of the other duckweed and problems that people see and how they've managed it. But it's also remembering, you know, your aeration controls, maybe some of your, if there's native wildlife that you can put in that eat some of this. You know, there might be some other biological, and that's where the Pond Guy, I thought was really good about how he does biological controls, mechanical controls, chemical controls. He kind of had a more holistic approach to it. And there may be some other sites too that you run across, but I felt like they gave some good options. TVA, they do this a lot for their reservoirs, and so they're great. But mainly it's just to be careful of what you're reading. Not everything you read is going to be the right application, even though they might be an expert. So it's just kind of take everything you read with a grain of salt and see if it really works for you. And I feel like there's going to be a lot of trial and error, and there's going to be a lot to modify because you're dealing with living organisms and living plant material. So, you know, what might be working this season may not work again. Something might be introduced to compete or change. So it's an ongoing process. These are the logos for the Tennessee Native Plant Society. I feel like that's a group that I personally want to check in on more to see if we can't get more of these species introduced through some of our vendors. And then just a reminder of what not to do. I can't tell you how many of these YouTube videos say to go collect in the wild. Well, if you're going and you're collecting in the wild, you're probably going to be reintroducing a lot of the problem species because in many cases they're going to have over-dominated the native species. So we don't recommend you can't catch any of the wildlife like the turtles, which a lot of people try and do. You're not supposed to do that. But even your plants, be careful of the plant selection because you may introduce something that you don't want. So if you can get a true species that you can order through the mail, I would encourage that. Don't forget safety. Some of these, depending on how deep they are, they can be a potential for drowning. So just to modify, you know, your property in case you can prevent that, especially if there are kids around. Maintenance. There's always ongoing maintenance. So even with your rain gardens or your water features, if you end up using the container gardens and your pumps and stuff like that. So just figuring out mosquito prevention, you know, all that goes along with it. And then just to use your own judgment and start to become maybe your own best advocate through the people that you know and can trust their opinion that may have experience, and maybe trying and evaluate whether or not it's just that they're selling the plant or that they've, you know, they have a more holistic view of the whole watershed in general. And that was my big kind of presentation. So I'm curious if, I know this didn't answer a lot of your questions, but I'm wondering if it might have opened your eyes to maybe how it's a bigger scope than just your pond. And I feel like water features add so much value in how they make us feel that we really want to encourage those to be out there. And I know the trends are kind of going with some of these, you know, other water features in just the backyard. So, you know, I want to encourage those, and I know I appreciate them very much in the ponds, but just thinking of, you know, it as a bigger scale and how it contributes in general. Does anybody have any comments or suggestions or vendors that they've used?
I'd like to ask for all the group here, if anyone has suggestions. We're a big city, but we have lousy vendor selection for pond maintenance. Who have people been using?
finding two vendors locally who were completely unreliable, and